The overhead lights of the Athens Olympic basketball gymnasium beat down on the wooden court, thick summer heat hanging in the air over Athens, and the roar of 20,000 people filling every corner of the space. Manu Ginobili hunches his back just outside the three-point line, his fingers curled tight around the basketball, sweat dripping down his temples and slipping under the collar of his jersey. A Team USA defender stands directly in front of him, arms raised high to block. Every possible shooting angle, the red numbers on the shot clock ticking down to just 8 seconds left on the clock. He shifts his left foot a half step to the side, his shoulder dipping slightly in a fake to drive forward, the basketball spinning fast in his right palm as his eyes flick across the court to his teammates in the paint. His body leans forward, muscles coiled and ready to push off the floor. And in that split second, the roar of the crowd rises up all at once, loud enough to drown out everything else in the gym. He first held a basketball when he was 2 years. Old small fingers wrapping around the rubber surface as he ran unsteady across the wooden floors of the Bahia del Norte gym, his father Jorge close behind to keep him from tripping over the court lines. By 4, the ball was never far from his side, tucked in his bed at night, clutched in his hand on walks to the store with his mother Raquel, rolled across the kitchen floor while the family ate dinner. Jorge was an executive at the club, and he made the gym a second home for his son, teaching him the first basics of dribbling and shooting when most kids his age were still playing with toy cars. Manu would watch the older players practice for hours, his eyes fixed on their movements, and when he got home, he'd mimic the shots he'd seen, jumping off one foot and flicking his wrist, even if the ball only hit the bottom of the hoop. He loved the game, the feel of the ball in his hands, the sound of it swishing through the net, but he never said it out loud when Raquel was near. Raquel was a teacher, and she sat him down at the kitchen table more than once, her voice steady as she told him he needed to focus on his schoolwork, that accounting was a good, steady path, that playing basketball for a living was no life for a boy. She'd seen his older brothers Leandro and Sebastian put the game above everything, skip classes to practice, and she would not let the same happen for Manu. So he said nothing, just nodded and put his basketball away in the closet after school, doing his homework at the table until his eyes burned, the sound of the gym's bounce pass echoing in his head. When the boys were home, the backyard turned into a court, Leandro and Sebastian challenging Manu to one-on-one every chance they got. The games were never close. Manu would dribble hard, try to drive past them, and they'd steal the ball easily, block his shots before he even had a chance to release it. More than once, the score hit 11-0, and Manu would drop the ball and walk to the porch, his shoulders hunched, his throat tight, with frustration. He thought he'd never be as good as them, never fast enough or strong enough or smart enough on the court. Raquel would find him there sometimes, hand him a glass of lemonade and sit with him in silence. No lectures, just her presence beside him. It was a small comfort, but it stuck with him. He met Pepe Sanchez at the club, a boy his age who loved the game just as much, and they'd stay late after practice, shooting hoops until the lights turned off, pushing each other to get better. Jorge would watch them, standing by the side of the court, and he'd tell anyone who asked that his youngest son was a natural scorer and playmaker, that he had a speed and creativity no one could teach. Manu heard it, and it made him want to try harder, even when the losses to his brothers stung. He kept a secret notebook in his desk where he wrote down his school grades every time he got them, then added Leandro and Sebastian's grades beside his own, comparing the numbers line by line. He never let anyone see it, but he'd study the pages for minutes, determined to keep his marks high enough to make Raquel proud, high enough that she wouldn't stop him from going to the gym when he could sneak away. He still slept with his basketball, pressing it to his chest at night, and he'd lie there and watch videos of Michael Jordan, pausing the tape to copy the way Jordan jumped, the way he held his hand on the follow-through. By the time he was 15, he stood at 6'1", still short for a basketball player with pro dreams, and he tried out for the Argentine national youth team, practicing for weeks until his legs ached, thinking this was his chance to prove he was good enough. He ran the drills, took the shots, passed the ball where his coach told him to, and when the list of players was posted, his name was not there. The coach pulled him aside, said he was too short, too raw, not ready for the level of play. Manu nodded, said thank you, and took the paper the coach handed him, the one that said he'd been cut. His fingers tight around the edge as he walked out of the training facility. He ended up at the Bahiense del Norte gym, standing on the concrete sidewalk outside the doors, the paper crinkling in his hand. Through the glass, he could see Leandro and Sebastian on the court, running a drill, their laughter carrying through the open window. He stared at them for a minute, his chest heavy, then crumpled the paper into a tight ball and stuffed it into the pocket of his jeans. He turned and started walking home, the sun dipping low over the rooftops of Bahia Blanca, the gym's lights, turning on behind him. He kicked a small stone hard across the pavement, and he did not look back once. The walk home from the gym stayed with him for days, the crumpled paper in his pocket, a heavy weight every time he moved. He stopped going to the Bahiense del Norte courts, kept his basketball in the closet, and focused only on his schoolwork, the way Raquel had always wanted. But Sebastian noticed the empty space at the gym, the way Manu stared at the floor during family dinners, and one evening he knocked on Manu's bedroom door, a basketball under his arm. He said he'd skip his own practice sessions, that he'd work with Manu every morning and night, teach him the little tricks for driving past defenders, the way to set up a jump shot so it was harder to block. Manu nodded, and the next day they were at the gym before the sun came up, Sebastian walking him through every move, correcting his dribble when it wavered, his stance when it slipped. Manu's hands moved fast, switching the ball from right to left without thinking, a small, unpolished skill that Sebastian pointed out, telling him to hone it, to make it a weapon. Leandro sat with them once in a while, leaning against the wall as they practiced, and he told Manu he'd been cut from a team too, years before, that rejection didn't mean the game was over, just that the work had to get harder. Jorge watched the boys practice, and he knew Manu needed more than just tips and encouragement. One afternoon, he led Manu into the gym, handed him a basket of basketballs, and locked the doors from the outside. He yelled through the glass that Manu couldn't leave until he made 500 three-pointers, no exceptions. Manu stared at the basket, then at the pile of balls, and started shooting. The sun set, the gym lights clicked on, and his right wrist started to throb, a dull ache that turned sharp with every flick of his hand. He kept going, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm, counting each make under his breath. By midnight, his wrist was swollen, too sore to grip the ball tight, so he switched to his left hand, fumbling at first, then finding a rhythm. He sank the 500th shot just as the sky started to lighten, and Jorge unlocked the door, wordlessly, clapping him on the back as he walked out. The ache in his wrist didn't fade for days, but Manu didn't complain. He started showing up at the gym earlier than everyone else, staying later, working on his shot and his strength, the words the national youth coach had said about being too short and too raw looping in his head. He let the doubt fuel him, turning every negative thought into one more rep, one more shot. He never let the training cut into his schoolwork, sitting at the kitchen table after hours at the gym to finish homework and study for tests, his grades never slipping below the top of his class. Raquel noticed, and she never said a word about the time he spent at the court, just set a glass of milk in front of him when he sat down, her quiet support a constant. He joined the Bahiense del Norte youth team at 13, and by 16, he was the core of the roster, leading the team to regional championships game after game, his left and right-hand dribble making him hard to guard, his jump shot getting sharper by the day. The wins didn't stop the whispers from other players, the comments about his height, but Manu didn't listen anymore. Then the growth spurt hit, fast and sudden, starting when he was 17 and continuing until he turned 18. He went from 6'1" to 6'6", his limbs stretching out, his body feeling foreign in his own skin. Raquel panicked, taking him to the doctor over and over to make sure it was normal, her hand tight on his arm every time the doctor checked his vitals. On his 18th birthday, she handed him a small box, and inside was an accounting calculator, sleek and new, a quiet reminder of the path she still hoped he'd take. He tried to adapt to his new height, but every movement on the court felt off. His jump shot was stiff, his dribble slower, the ball bouncing too high off his fingertips like he'd forgotten how to hold it. Jorge spent hours with him in the gym, adjusting his stance, his release point, his footwork, but the muscle memory was gone, replaced by clumsiness and frustration. One evening, he stayed late at the gym, the only person there, and stood in front of the full-length mirror on the wall. He lifted his arm to shoot, his body tensing up, and the ball hit the rim hard, bouncing away across the floor. He stared at his reflection, at the taller frame he still didn't recognize, and his fingers curled into a fist at his side. He bent down to pick up the ball, his palm brushing the rough leather, and he could feel the calluses there, thick and hard from years of shooting, of dribbling, of not quitting. The calluses on his palms only thickened as he worked, reworking his shot and his dribble until his body felt like his own again, the new height no longer a weight but a gift. He moved on the court with a fluidity he'd never had before, his longer limbs letting him reach higher, drive farther, shoot over defenders who'd once blocked him with ease. By 18, he was ready for the next step, and when the chance to play for Andino Sport Club in the Argentine Professional League came, he took it, no hesitation. He developed a pre-game routine then, sitting in the locker room with a pair of headphones on for exactly 15 minutes, the slow, rhythmic beat of Argentine tango filling his ears, calming the nerves that bubbled in his chest before every tip-off. His professional debut went like he'd practiced 100 times, 10 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, the ball moving through his hands like it always had. The crowd's cheers a faint hum in the background as he focused on the play. He signed with Estudiantes de Bahia Blanca 2 years later, and he quickly became the team's go-to player, his average climbing to 18 points a game, his passes sharp, and his shots consistent. He kept an old basketball in his gym bag, the leather worn thin, the seams fraying, the one his grandfather had used when he started the Bay youth team decades before. He'd touch it before every game, his fingers brushing the faded logo, a quiet moment of grounding before the chaos began. The games got harder, the physicality amped up, and he'd finish most nights with small bruises on his arms and legs, a scrape on his knee or a sore shoulder, but he never missed a game, taping up the sore spots and stepping onto the court anyway. He still made time for school, though. His schedule packed tight with morning practices, afternoon classes, evening games, and late-night study sessions. He'd do his homework in the locker room after practice, at his kitchen table after games, his grades never slipping, a promise he'd made to himself to keep Raquel from worrying. In 1997, he got the call to join the Argentine national youth team for the South American Youth Championship, and he packed his bag the same day, the old basketball from his grandfather tucked in the side. It was there he met Luis Scola, a kid with a relentless work ethic and a love for the game that matched his own. They'd stay late after team practices, running drills together, talking through plays for hours, figuring out how to make each other better, how to make the whole team better. The two of them became the heart of the squad, leading Argentina to the championship title, and Manu was named to the all-tournament team, a recognition that made his chest swell with pride. Coach Messina noticed him then, pulling him aside after one of the games and telling him his height was a strength, that his combination of speed and size made him stand out, that he could go far if he kept working. The words stuck with him, a confirmation of what he'd always hoped, that he could make a real life out of the game. His family was split when the offer came in 1998, a letter from Viola Reggio Calabria, an Italian club, asking him to come play for them. Jorge was thrilled, clapping him on the back and telling him Europe would test him, make him a better player, that the tactical side of the game there would sharpen his skills like nothing in Argentina could. Raquel was quiet, though, her fingers twisting the edge of the kitchen table as she told him she wished he'd stay, finish his accounting degree, build a steady life at home. Leandro sat with him for hours, going over what it meant to be a professional. The long days and the hard nights, the little things that no one tells you about life on the road. Sebastian used all the connections he'd built in the Argentine basketball world to tell him what he could expect in Italy, the leagues, the coaches, the way the game was played. Manu listened to all of them, nodding and asking questions, but he didn't have an answer for any of them, not yet. He went to the beach that summer, the white sand of Bahia Blanca stretching out in front of him, the ocean crashing against the shore. He sat down on a smooth rock, the letter from the Italian club in one hand, the accounting calculator Raquel had given him for his 18th birthday, sitting on the rock beside him. He ran his finger over the signature at the bottom of the offer. Letter, the ink dark and bold, over and over again, the sound of the waves, the only noise around him. The wind picked up, blowing his hair into his face, and he stared out at the horizon, the water blending into the sky, and he still didn't know what to do. The horizon held no answers, but he knew he had to go, had to see what the game was like, beyond the beaches of Bahia Blanca, beyond the leagues of Argentina. He packed his bags a week later, the old basketball from his grandfather in his duffel, the accounting calculator from Raquel tucked in his carry-on, and boarded a plane for Italy, his first trip outside of South America. The air in Reggio Calabria felt different, thick with the smell of citrus and sea salt, the language a rapid mix of sounds he didn't understand, the roads built for cars that drove on the right even though his hands kept drifting to the left. Side of the wheel, a habit he couldn't shake no matter how hard he tried. He moved into a small apartment, the rent eating up most of his first paycheck, and a few days later, a wire transfer arrived from Sebastian. No note, just the money. Quiet lifeline from home. Basketball was the only familiar thing at first. He stepped onto the court for Viola Reggio Calabria and played like he always had, fast and free, taking shots when he saw an opening, passing when the mood struck him, his Argentine style clashing hard with the structured, tactical play of European basketball. He led the team in scoring by the middle of the season, 16.9 a game, the ball going through the net so often the crowd cheered his name, but Coach Messina was never satisfied. He'd yell at Manu from the sidelines, call him selfish, tell him he ignored the playbook, that individual talent meant nothing if it didn't fit the team. Manu would clench his jaw, nod, and then go back on the court and play the same way, stubborn and proud, sure his way was the right one. He started chewing mint gum during every game, a stick in his mouth from warm-ups to the final buzzer, the sharp flavor keeping him focused, keeping the frustration at bay. After practice, he'd fill a tub with cold water, 10 to 12 degrees, and sit in it for 10 minutes, his muscles screaming, the cold seeping into his bones, a ritual to help his body recover from the endless drills and the physical European play. A minor ankle sprain slowed him down once, a tweak during a game, and he rested for a few days, did light therapy, and was back on the court before anyone expected it. No complaints. The loss in the 1999 European League hit hard, a bitter defeat that left the team silent in the locker room. Manu sat there for hours after everyone left, replaying the game in his head, every bad pass, every shot he took that ignored an open teammate, every time he'd broken the playbook for his own style. He realized Messina was right, that his talent was wasted if he didn't play with the team, not against it. The next day, he went to Messina's office, no excuses, just a question, asking how to adapt, how to keep his creativity while still following the tactics. Messina smiled, a rare thing, and sat with him for hours, drawing up plays, showing him how to weave his speed and his shot into the team's game plan, how to be a playmaker first and a scorer second. Teammates noticed the change, and they took him under their wing, teaching him Italian phrases over coffee, taking him to local restaurants, showing him how to navigate the city that was still strange to him. They laughed at his left-side driving habit, teased him about his gum, and for the first time since he'd arrived, Italy didn't feel like a foreign place, just a new one. The 1999 NBA draft came and went, Manu barely paying attention, his focus on the European season, on learning to play the game a new way. He was in the gym working on a new passing drill when his phone rang, a friend from Argentina on the line, yelling that the San Antonio Spurs had picked him, 57th overall. In the second round, he stared at the phone, confused, and pulled up the draft coverage on his laptop, scrolling through the names, his own nowhere to be seen, a forgotten pick on a night of big names and big dreams. Messina and his family told him to stay, to keep. Developing in Europe, that the NBA would still be there when he was ready, and Manu listened, knowing they were right. He had work to do still, before he could step onto an NBA court. It was a cold winter night in 1999 when he finished the team's tactical drills, the gym empty except for him, the lights casting long shadows on the court. He grabbed a ball, moved to the three-point line, and switched to his left hand, the one he'd used to sink that 500th shot years before. He released the ball, and it swished through the net, the sound loud in the quiet gym, the net snapping softly as it fell. He stood there for a second, staring at the hoop, then pulled his phone out of his pocket, his thumb hovering over the call button for home. He glanced at the screen, the time staring back at him, late night in Italy, early morning in Argentina, his family still asleep in their beds, the ocean miles and miles away. The quiet of the Italian gym on those winter nights gave way to a new kind of energy when Manu signed with Virtus Bologna, a top club with big expectations and a legacy of winning. He picked the number 20 for his jersey, a number that felt right in his hands, one he knew he'd hold on to for the rest of his career, and stepped onto the court ready to prove he could play at the highest level of European basketball. Coach Messina worked with him daily, breaking down his jump shot to smooth out the release, teaching him to read the court better and pass with more purpose, turning him from a scorer who could drive to a complete player who could control the game. Manu listened, absorbed every lesson, and his game grew leaps and bounds, his body moving with the mix of creativity he'd brought from Argentina and the tactical discipline he'd learned in Europe. The hard work paid off, and the 2000-2001 season became one for the books, Manu leading Virtus Bologna to the Italian League title, the Italian Cup, and the EuroLeague Championship, a triple crown that made the basketball world sit up and take notice. He was named the EuroLeague Finals MVP and the Italian League MVP, awards that solidified his place as one of the best players in Europe, and he scored 26 points in the EuroLeague Finals, a performance he'd remember for the rest of his life. After the game, he asked for the game ball, signed his name on it and jotted down the date, tucking it away as a keepsake, a reminder of how far he'd come from the boy running the courts in Bahia Blanca. He brought the Italian League MVP trophy back to Argentina that summer, handing it to his parents with a quiet smile, grateful for all the support they'd given him, even when Raquel still wished he'd walk away from the game and finish his accounting degree. He promised her he would, one day, when his playing days were over, and she nodded, her hand brushing his cheek, the worry in her eyes softening a little. The 2001-2002 season was even better, Manu repeating as the Italian League MVP and leading the EuroLeague in scoring with an average of 28.4 points a game, defenders unable to stop him, his left and right-hand dribble still a nightmare to guard, his three-point shot falling with deadly consistency. He chewed mint gum through every game, the same brand he'd started using in Reggio Calabria, the sharp taste a constant as he dominated the court, and he finished most nights with the kind of stats that made NBA teams call his agent non-stop. The San Antonio Spurs were the most persistent, their front office reaching out time and again, telling him they believed in him, that he could be a star in the NBA. Jorge and his brothers urged him to go, telling him the NBA was the ultimate challenge, the place where the best players in the world competed, while Raquel stayed quiet. The same fear of him being far away and hurt lingering in her voice when she spoke about it. In the summer of 2002, Manu joined the Argentine national team for the FIBA World Championship in Indianapolis, the chance to play against the United States Team USA, the so-called Dream Team V, too good to pass up. The American team had a 58-game winning streak in international play, a streak everyone thought would never be broken, but Manu and the Argentine squad had other plans. Before the tournament, he faced Russia, playing 23 minutes and scoring 21 points, his gum still in his mouth, his legs moving fast, his shot falling just like it had in Europe. Then came the game against Team USA, a hard-fought battle where Manu's playmaking and scoring were the difference. Argentina pulling off the upset and ending the unbroken winning streak. The win made Manu a hero in Argentina, a symbol of what the country's basketball players could do, and he was named to the all-tournament team, another honor to add to his growing collection. But the tournament came with a cost, a bad sprain. To his right ankle during one of the later games, a sharp pain that made him limp off the court, the first major injury of his career. He pushed through it, playing in the remaining games, but the ankle ached long after the tournament ended, a dull throb that would follow him for years to come. Scouts from the Spurs were at every game, watching his every move, and their calls got more frequent after the World Championship, the team making it clear they wanted him in San Antonio for the next season. Manu thought long and hard, weighing the comfort of being the star in Europe, where everyone knew his name and he could win every year, against the unknown of the NBA, where he'd be a newcomer, a foreign player with something to prove. He thought about the boy who'd been cut from the national youth team for being too short, the boy who'd shot 500 three-pointers in an empty gym until the sun came up, and he knew he couldn't turn down the challenge. He made his decision, told the Spurs he'd come, and started packing his bags in Italy, careful to wrap the EuroLeague Finals MVP trophy in bubble wrap and mail it back to his parents' house in Bahia Blanca, a piece of his European legacy to keep safe. He grabbed his plane ticket to San Antonio, the paper crisp in his hand, and set a new San Antonio Spurs jersey with the number 20 on it beside his bag, the black and silver a stark contrast to the Italian jerseys he'd worn for years. He walked to the gate at the Italian airport, the hum of the terminal around him, the ankle he'd sprained in Indianapolis a little sore as he stood there. He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the boarding door ahead, and lifted his foot to step through. The step through the boarding gate led him across the ocean to San Antonio, a city with warm air and a basketball team that waited for him with open arms but high expectations. He kept his pre-game routine intact from the first day he stepped into the Spurs gym, stretching his legs and arms slowly in the same order every time, taking 100 jump shots from the same spots on the court, slipping on a pair of headphones. To listen to Latin music for 10 minutes before every practice and game, the familiar beats grounding him in the chaos of a new league, a new country, a new style of basketball. His NBA debut came on October 30th against the Los Angeles Lakers, and he stepped onto the court at the Staples Center with his heart racing, the bright lights brighter than any he'd seen in Europe, the physicality of the game hitting him the second the ball was tipped. He finished with 7 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, small numbers but a start, and he walked off the court knowing he had more to give, knowing the NBA would demand everything he had. The old pain in his right ankle flared up in December, a sharp twinge during a practice drill that left him limping to the bench, the same ankle he'd sprained at the World Championship just months before. The doctors said he'd need to sit out 11 games, and Manu nodded. No argument, just asking for a list of rehab exercises he could do to strengthen the joint while he was sidelined. He spent the days in the Spurs facility, watching game tape for hours, studying how the other guards in the league moved, how they read the defense, how they fit into their team systems. When he got bored, he picked up a pen and paper and wrote with his left hand, a mindless task that kept his hands busy, a contrast to the right hand he used to shoot and dribble, the letters messy and uneven, but a welcome distraction. His father. Jorge called every day, going over the tape with him, pointing out small mistakes in his footwork, telling him how to adjust his game to the NBA's speed, while his mother Raquel called to say she was praying for him, her voice soft with worry, asking him to take it easy, to not push his body too hard. He promised her he wouldn't, even as he stayed late at the facility, to do extra ankle stretches, to build strength in his calf and ankle muscles, determined to come back stronger. The ankle gave out again in February, another sprain during a scrimmage, this one bad enough to keep him out until after the All-Star break. The whispers started then, fans and analysts saying he was just another European player who couldn't hack it in the NBA, that the Spurs had wasted a pick on the so-called EuroLeague MVP, that his style was too reckless, too wild for the structured Spurs system. Manu heard the words, and they stung, but he didn't let them show, just kept working on his rehab, just kept watching tape. He clashed with coach Greg Popovich often when he came back, Popovich yelling from the sidelines when Manu took a risky pass, when he dove for a loose ball no one else would go for, when he broke the playbook to make a play on his own. Manu would clench his jaw, play the next possession the same way, stubborn, and one day he walked into Popovich's office, no apology, just a statement. He said he couldn't play any other way, that his creativity, his risk-taking, was what made him a good player, that he could fit it into the team's system if Popovich let him try. Popovich stared at him for a minute, then grunted and told him to prove it, a conversation that changed everything between them. He sat with Manu for hours, drawing up plays that let him use his instincts, that let him be creative within the structure. And for the first time, Manu felt like he belonged. The games got better after that, his numbers climbing, his passes sharper, his shots falling more consistently, his reckless style turning into smart, calculated plays that lifted the team. In March, he was named the Western Conference Rookie of the Month, and he earned a spot on the All-Rookie Second Team, the first tangible recognition of his work in the NBA, a middle finger to everyone who doubted him. The playoffs came, and Manu played with a fire no one could match, his ankle sore every night, but never enough to keep him off the court, his left and right-hand dribble confusing defenders, his three-point shot falling when the team needed it most. The Spurs faced the New Jersey Nets in the finals, and Manu played a key role in the series, his energy off the bench shifting the momentum game after game, the team winning in 6 games to claim the championship. He grabbed the game ball after the final buzzer, signing his name on it and writing 2003 San Antonio in bold marker, tucking it away with his European trophies, a new piece of history to hold on to. The award ceremony came moments later, the confetti. Falling from the rafters of the AT&T Center, the sound of the crowd's cheers loud in his ears. Manu stood in the middle of the court, a championship medal around his neck, the signed game ball in his hands, champagne spraying all around him from his teammates. He felt a hand on the top of his head, a gentle pat, and he turned to see Tim Duncan standing behind him, a rare smile on his face. Manu smiled back, the champagne foam sticking to his cheeks and his hair, the confetti landing on his shoulders and the ball in his hands, the bright lights of the arena glinting off the gold of the medal, the joy in the air thick enough to touch. The champagne faded, the confetti was swept from the court, and the next season brought a new challenge Manu hadn't seen coming. Popovich pulled him into his office before training camp and told him he'd be coming off the bench, the 6th man, the spark to lift the team when the starters needed a rest. Manu's jaw tightened, his chest tight with frustration. He'd just won a championship, proven he could play at the NBA's highest level, and now he was being moved to the bench. He argued, his voice sharp, and Popovich let him talk, then leaned back in his chair and told him the numbers didn't matter, the starting spot didn't matter, only winning did. He said Manu's energy, his creativity, his ability to change the game in an instant was better used coming off the bench. That he'd be the most dangerous 6th man in the league, that the team needed this from him. Manu left the office angry, but he thought about it all night, about the way the Spurs played, about the championship he'd just won, about what it meant to be part of a team. He showed up to practice the next day and nodded at Popovich. No more arguments, just a silent promise to play whatever role the team needed. The 2004-05 season proved Popovich right. Manu came off the bench every game, averaging 16 points a night, his play fast and fierce, his passes still risky but always precise, his three-point shot falling when the team needed it most. He was the spark Popovich had talked about, turning close games into wins, lifting the team with his energy and his heart. The Spurs made it back to the finals, facing the Detroit Pistons, a tough defensive team that no one thought they could beat. Manu was unstoppable, averaging 18.7 points, 5.9 rebounds, and 4 assists a game, his big plays in the clutch turning the series in the Spurs' favor. They won in 7 games, Manu's 2nd NBA championship, and he walked off the court knowing Popovich had been right. Roles didn't define a player, winning did. The year held more joy off the court, too. He married Marianella, his childhood sweetheart, in a small ceremony in Bahia Blanca, and 4 days later, he got a call from the Spurs front office, a 6-year, $52 million contract extension, sitting on the table. It was a perfect year, a championship, a wedding, a new contract, all the hard work paying off in ways he'd never imagined. The summer of 2004 brought the Athens Olympics, and Manu was named captain of the Argentine national team, leading the so-called Golden Generation with Luis Scola by his side. The two had played together since the South American Youth Championship, and their chemistry on the court was unmatchable, each knowing exactly what the other would do before they did it. Manu chewed his usual mint gum through every game, the sharp flavor keeping him focused, and in the semi-final against Team USA's Dream Team Sixk, he was electric. 13 shots, 9 makes, 29 points, his drives to the basket unstoppable, his three-pointers falling at the perfect moments. Argentina beat the US, a stunning upset, and then beat Italy in the final to win the gold medal, the first Olympic basketball gold for the country. Manu was named the tournament MVP, and he held the gold medal tight as he stood on the podium. Scola beside him, the two of them hugging as the Argentine national anthem played. He took the medal home and put it in a glass case on a shelf in his house, a team photo of the Argentine squad sitting right next to it, a reminder of the bond he shared with those players, a bond that went beyond basketball. The years that followed were a mix of incredible highs and brutal lows. In 2005, he scored 48 points against the Phoenix Suns, a career high, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists to go with it, his best game as an NBA player to that point. In 2007, he hit a game-winning shot with 0.4 seconds left in the Western Conference semifinals against the Suns, a buzzer beater that sent the Spurs to the Western Conference Finals and eventually to their third NBA championship, Manu's third ring. In 2008, he was named the NBA Sixth Man of the Year, the first Spur to ever win the award, and he stood at the podium and thanked Popovich, thanked his teammates, said the award wasn't his alone, it was the team's. He'd learned his lesson. Well, team first. Always. He faced Kobe Bryant in the 2008 Western Conference Finals, a brutal 7-game series that the Lakers won, and the two guards respected each other deeply, their battles on the court fierce but fair, each pushing the other to be better. Manu called Kobe the best player he'd ever faced, and Kobe said Manu was the most dangerous competitor he'd ever played against, a high praise from one of the greatest to ever play the game. The 2008 Beijing Olympics brought the first real scare of his career, a bad sprain to his left ankle in a game against Greece, a pain so sharp he crumpled to the floor, unable to stand. He pushed through it, though, taping the ankle tight and playing in the bronze medal game, leading Argentina to a win over Lithuania, but the damage was done. The ankle hurt for weeks after, and he missed 12 games of the 2008-09 NBA regular season. Sitting on the bench and watching his team play, the fear of never being the same player creeping into his mind, the thought of retirement crossing it more than once. Marianella was with him every step of the way, sitting with him at rehab, holding his hand at doctor's appointments, telling him he was stronger than the injury, that he'd come back better. Her support pulled him through, and he returned to the court, but the injuries didn't stop. In late 2008, his right fibula developed a stress fracture, a small crack that got worse with every game, until the doctors told him he had to sit out the rest of the season, a season-ending injury. The Spurs lost in the first round of the playoffs without him, and Manu's chest was heavy with guilt. He thought he'd let the team down, thought his body had failed them. He kept a journal during those years, writing down every game's mistakes and successes, every shot he missed, every pass he made, every play that worked, and everyone that didn't. He called his mother Raquel every night after a game, win or lose, just to say he was okay, to hear her voice, to ground himself in the love of his family. He developed small rituals, the gum, the post-game call, the journal, things that kept him steady in the chaos of the NBA and international basketball. In 2009, before his injury, a bat flew onto the Spurs court on Halloween night, and Manu reacted without thinking, slapping it out of the air with one hand. He had to get multiple rabies shots after, and the Spurs framed the jersey he'd worn that night, a silly moment in a career full of intense ones, a reminder that basketball could be fun too. The rest of 2009 was spent in rehab, the stress fracture. In his fibula slow to heal, the workouts grueling, the days long. He spent every day in the Spurs training facility in San Antonio, lifting weights, doing leg exercises, building strength in his right leg, determined to come back stronger, determined to make up for the season he'd missed. Sweat soaked through his training shirt, the fabric sticking to his back and chest as he finished a set of leg presses, his muscles burning, his right leg throbbing with a dull ache that never really went away. He sat on the bench for a minute, catching his breath, and reached down to rub his right foot, the spot where the stress fracture had been, the spot that had cost him a season, the spot that still hurt when he pushed too hard. He looked over. At the cold plunge tub in the corner of the gym, the water inside cold enough to see the faint mist rising from the surface, the same kind of cold tub he'd used in Italy all those years ago. He stood up, his legs shaking a little, and walked over to the tub, his hand reaching out to grab the edge, ready to step in, ready to do whatever it took to come back. The cold of the plunge tub seeped into his bones, a familiar sting that woke. His muscles up and set his mind straight, the same sharp chill he'd known in the Italian gyms all those years before. He stepped out dripping wet, a towel slung over his shoulder, his right leg still throbbing with a dull ache but steady beneath him, and stepped back into the court for the new season, ready to make up for the time he'd lost on the sidelines. He averaged 16.5 points and 4.9 assists a game that year. His energy back in every play, his passes still sharp and unexpected, the kind that made defenders spin and reach for air, his body holding up through the grind of back-to-back games and cross-country flights. From that season on, he wore a custom wristband every time he stepped onto the court, the Argentine flag stitched neat on one side, the Spurs logo on the other, a small piece of home pressed against his skin no matter where the game took him. A reminder of the boy from Bahia Blanca who'd once run a gym floor with a ball too big for his hands. The bond between him, Tim Duncan, and Tony Parker deepened with every game, the three of them moving on the court with a silent understanding no other trio in the league could touch. Parker's lightning-fast drives to the basket paired with Manu's tricky, no-look passes made them the most dangerous backcourt in the NBA, and Duncan's steady, unshakable presence in the paint held it all together. They were the GDP, and they played not for stats or individual glory, but for each other, for the team stitched across their chests. Joy came off the court that same year, the kind that hit harder than any championship win, the birth of his twin boys, their tiny fingers, curling around his thumb when he first held them. He missed a handful of games for their arrival, and when he walked back into the Spurs locker room, the shelves and benches were lined with tiny baby clothes and stuffed animals, his teammates yelling jokes and congratulations, the noise loud, but warm, the kind of joy that only a team that felt like family could bring. He talked about the boys nonstop, a soft smile on his face even after tough losses, and the light in his eyes when he spoke of them seeped into his play on the court, a new kind of purpose in every pass and shot. The years rolled on, and the injuries came too, slow and unrelenting, a quiet reminder that his body was no longer the young, flexible one it had been in his teens and 20s. In one regular season game, a hard fall to the floor left his left hand twisted at an odd angle. The fifth metacarpal fractured clean through, the doctors saying he'd need surgery to put a screw and a metal plate in to fix it right. He sat out 6 weeks, his hand encased in a thick cast, and instead of just watching game tape from the bench, he spent his days with the Spurs' young players, Patty Mills, DeJounte Murray, pulling them aside to the practice court, showing them the little tricks he'd learned over decades, how to read a defender's body language, how to make a pass no one saw coming, how to keep playing when every muscle in your body screamed to stop. When he came back, he stepped onto the court against the Suns and scored 15 points and 3 assists in 20 minutes, his left hand still stiff and slow to move, but his shot still true, his instincts still sharp, a reminder that age and injury couldn't dim the fire inside him. He walked onto the All-Star court a second time, sharing the floor with the league's best, with players who'd grown up watching him play, a testament to his staying power, to the fact that he was still one of the most talented players in the game, even as his body slowed down. His battles with LeBron James over the years had shifted from bitter rivalry to quiet, hard-earned respect, the two of them leaving everything on the court every time they faced off, each pushing the other to play better, to be better. The first time he faced James and the Heat in the finals was the hardest loss of his career, the Spurs up by 5 points with 20 seconds left in the final game, only to watch a game-tying three-pointer swish through the net and the Heat win in overtime. Manu's late-game turnover had been a small piece of the loss, but he carried it with him all the same, his chest heavy with guilt, meeting with Duncan and Parker in the empty locker room after the game, their voices low as they made a promise to each other. They'd be back, and they'd win it all. He thought about his boys, about the new baby his wife Marianella was expecting, about the team that had become his second family, and he knew he had to keep fighting. For them, for the Spurs, for the little boy who'd once been cut from a youth team for being too short. A little before the next playoffs, his third son was born, a tiny bundle of joy named Luca, and his arrival became a new kind of motivation, a reason to push harder, to bring another championship home to his growing family. The Spurs faced the Heat again in the finals that year, and this time everything was different. They played fast, they played together, they played like the team Popovich had built over all those years, every player moving as one. Manu averaged 14.4 points and 3.9 assists a game in that series. His play steady and smart, his decades of experience guiding the team through every tough moment, every close possession. The Spurs won in 5 games, a dominant series that left no doubt who the best team in the league was, and Manu held the championship trophy tight in one arm, his 3 sons in the other, Marianella by his side, the weight of the previous year's loss lifting off his chest, replaced by joy and relief. The years after that were a mix of more injuries and more fights, his body slowing down more with every season, but his mind still as sharp as ever, his instincts still unbeatable. In one game against the Pelicans, a hard, accidental hit to his groin left him writhing on the floor in pain, the doctors later telling him he'd suffered a serious testicular injury that required emergency repair surgery on his right testicle. He sat out 12 games, and Popovich drove him home from the hospital the night of the surgery, calling him every single day to check on his progress, a small, quiet act of kindness that meant more than any trophy or award. When he came back, he wore a bulky protective cup under his jersey, a piece of gear he joked about nonstop with his teammates, saying he'd given his right testicle to the Spurs, that the team owed him one for that. He stepped onto the court against the Rockets a few games later and scored 22 points in just 15 minutes, a season high, the crowd cheering his name so loud the arena walls shook, their voices a roar of love and respect. He returned to the court just a week after the surgery for the playoffs against the Thunder, his body still sore, his movement still a little slow, but his heart still fully in it, his clutch plays and leadership helping the Spurs win the series. The day Duncan took off his Spurs jersey for the last time marked the end of an era. The man who'd touched his head after his first NBA championship. The man who'd been the heart of the team for 20 years, walking away from the game he loved. A little before that, for Parker's birthday, the 3 of them, Manu, Duncan, Parker, signed a single basketball, writing "Forever Brothers, Forever Spurs" across the front in bold marker, a keepsake for the years, a reminder of the bond they'd built on and off the court. Manu joked about Duncan's constant head touches making his hair thin, posting a photo of himself next to a vulture on social media and calling it his long-lost brother. The humor a soft way to hide the sadness of losing his closest friend on the court. He stepped into Duncan's role as the team's quiet leader after that, mimicking his calm demeanor, his focus on the team over the individual, passing on the Spurs culture to the young players who'd grown up watching him play, who now looked to him for guidance. The injuries kept coming, as they always did. Back spasms that left him stiff in the mornings, ankle sprains that slowed his drives, sore knees that ached after every game, but he kept coming back too, every single time. When he was 39, he twisted his left ankle during a practice, the same ankle that had sprained badly in the Olympics years before, and sat out a few games to rest and rehab, his body needing more time to heal than it once had. When he came back against the Lakers, he scored 20 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists, his old legs still moving fast enough to blow past young defenders, his 3-point shot still falling when the team needed it most, his fire still burning bright. The game ended, and the crowd didn't leave, staying on their feet, their voices chanting his name over and over, the sound echoing through the arena long after the final buzzer. He walked into the locker room, his left ankle throbbing with every step, and sank down onto a wooden chair, leaning forward to rub the sore spot, his fingers pressing firmly into the muscle to ease the dull pain. A bottle of water appeared in front of him, cold and sweating, and he looked up to see DeJounte Murray standing there, a small, shy smile on his face, the young guard who'd learned so much from him over the years. Manu took the water, his fingers brushing the kid's hand, and smiled back, patting him on the shoulder hard enough to make him laugh. He turned his head then, his gaze drifting toward the open locker room doors, toward the court beyond. The bright lights of the arena glowing in the distance, the sound of the crowd's cheers still floating in the air, still loud, still warm, still his. The cheers from the arena faded as he walked out of the locker room, the throbbing in his left ankle a constant reminder that his body could no longer keep up with the fire in his heart. The soreness spread beyond his ankle as the seasons turned, a dull ache in his knees that lingered after every practice, a tightness in his back that made it hard to sleep some nights, the small, persistent pains of a body that had played the game hard for decades. He played on anyway, his minutes on the court cut back to save his energy, but he cherished every second of it, every pass, every shot, every chance to step onto the floor with his team. He kept all his old pre-game rituals intact, even when he only played a handful of minutes a night. 16 minutes of Argentine tango in the locker room with his headphones on, a stick of mint gum in his mouth from warm-ups to the final buzzer. The same routines that had grounded him since his first professional game in Argentina. He hit a milestone on the court that season, stealing the ball one more time to become the Spurs' all-time leader in steals, the crowd erupting in cheers as the stat flashed on the jumbotron. He smiled and waved, a small, grateful gesture, and kept playing, the moment sweet but not enough to dull the pain in his joints. The playoffs came, and he missed a few games with the usual aches and pains, but when he came back, he stepped off the bench and scored double digits, the first player over 40 to do so in the playoffs for the Spurs, a feat that made the crowd cheer his name all over again. He played in more playoff games than Shaq after that, his legs slow, but his mind still sharp, his hands still quick, his ability to make a big play when the team needed it unchanged. He spent every practice he could with the young players, pulling them aside to talk about the game, to show them the little things that didn't show up on stat sheets, to pass on everything he'd learned in his years on the court. The boys listened, their eyes wide, and he saw himself in them. The kid from Bahia Blanca who'd once stared at the older players in the gym, hungry to learn. Off the court, the guilt weighed on him. He'd missed school plays, birthday parties, bedtime stories, all the small moments that made up childhood. His 3 boys growing up fast while he was on the road, playing games across the country and the world. They were all Spurs fans, though, wearing his number 20 jersey to every home game, yelling his name from the stands, their small faces lit up when he waved at them. It made the guilt sharper, the knowledge that they loved the game because of him, but that he'd missed so much of their lives because of it too. Marianella never complained, her support steady as it had always been. But he saw the tiredness in her eyes when he came home late from road trips, the way she'd juggled everything, alone for so long. He thought about it all, the pain in his body, the joy of the game, the empty chairs at his boys' birthday parties, and the question started to linger in his mind, quiet at first, then louder. Was it time to stop? Popovich pulled him into his office a few times, the conversation slow, no pressure, just 2 friends talking about the game, about life, about what came next. The coach told him he was the greatest work of his career, that he'd be welcome on the court for as long as he wanted to play, but that he respected whatever decision he made. Teammates hugged him after games, clapped him on the back, told him he couldn't retire, their jokes hiding the sadness of knowing the end was near. The Argentine national team called too, asking him to play one more time, but he shook his head, his body too sore, his heart still with the game, but his mind set on something else. He took a trip back to Bahia Blanca, walking into the Bahiense Del Norte gym for the first time in years, the wooden floors worn, the hoops the same ones he'd shot at as a kid. He stood there for a long time, quiet, thinking about the boy who'd run the floors with a ball in his hands, the boy who'd been cut from the youth team, the boy who'd shot 500 three-pointers in an empty gym until the sun came up. He finished the last few classes for his accounting degree while he was home, the same degree his mother had wanted for him all those years ago, a promise kept, a circle closed. He made his way to the beach in Bahia Blanca one summer afternoon, the sand warm under his feet, the ocean crashing against the shore. He sat down on a wooden chair, his Spurs number 20 jersey folded beside him, the fabric soft from years of wear. Marianella sat next to him, her hand in his, and their 3 boys ran on the sand in front of them, chasing the waves, their laughter loud and bright in the air. He pulled out his phone and opened a new message, his fingers hovering over the screen for a long time, the words hard to find. He typed slowly, thinking about every year, every game, every win and loss, every friend and teammate he'd known. Along the way, he paused for a second, his thumb resting on the send button, and looked out at his family, at the ocean, at the sky stretching out forever. Then he pressed the button, and the message was sent, out into the world, the end of one chapter, the start of something new. The send button clicked, and the weight of a 16-year career lifted off his chest, a mix of relief and sadness settling in as he watched his boys chase the waves on the beach. The days that followed were quiet, unstructured, a far cry from the rigid schedule of practices and games and road trips he'd known for decades. He woke up early without an alarm, made coffee for Marianella and breakfast for the boys, sat at the kitchen table and watched them do their homework. The silence of the house a strange contrast to the roar of arenas. He felt adrift at first, his hands empty without a basketball, his mind wandering to the court when he sat still for too long, the loss of the only identity he'd known for most of his adult life sinking in slow. He filled the days with family, though driving the boys to their soccer practices and baseball games, sitting on the sidelines and cheering like they'd cheered for him, tucking them into bed at night and reading the bedtime stories he'd missed for so many years. It was small, ordinary, and it healed the quiet guilt that had lingered for so long, the warmth of family replacing the empty space the game had left behind. He went back to school to finish the last of his accounting classes. The textbooks spread. Out on the dining room table, the accounting calculator Raquel had given him for his 18th birthday sitting beside them, its plastic surface worn smooth from years of being moved from shelf to shelf. He studied late at night after the boys were asleep, Marianella bringing him tea and sitting with him for a few minutes, the same quiet support she'd given him when he was a young player in Argentina, when he was a struggling rookie in the NBA. When he walked across the stage to get his degree, his mother sat in the front row, tears in her eyes, and he hugged her tight, a promise kept after all these years. He kept the calculator on his desk in the home office after that, a reminder of the girl his mother had hoped he'd be, the man he'd become, the 2 parts of him finally whole. The Spurs called soon after, asking him to come back as a special advisor, to work with the young players, to scout international talent, to pass on the Spurs culture he'd helped build for so long. He said yes without hesitation, stepping back into the gym not as a player, but as a mentor, sitting on the sidelines and watching practice, pulling players aside to talk about the game, to show them the little tricks he'd learned, to teach them the focus method he'd pieced together from his father's coaching and Popovich's relentless attention to detail. He didn't yell like Popovich, didn't push like his father, but he spoke with a quiet authority, the kind that comes from decades of playing the game at the highest level, and the young players listened, their eyes wide like he'd once looked at the older players in the Bahiense del Norte gym. He kept in touch with Leandro and Sebastian, too, flying back to Argentina a few times a year to play basketball with them, the same one-on-one games they'd played as kids, the score no longer mattering, just the feel of the ball in his hands, the sound of his brother's laughter on the court. The honors came one after another, slow and steady, a recognition of a career well lived. The Spurs retired his number 20, hanging the jersey in the rafters of the AT&T Center, and at the ceremony he put on a wig for the exhibition game, joking about the hair he'd lost to Duncan's constant head touches, the crowd laughing and cheering so loud the arena shook. A giant mural of him went up in a square in Buenos Aires, his face painted on the side of a building, and he went there one afternoon to sign it, fans gathering around to take photos, to say thank you, their voices warm and grateful. He was inducted into the FIBA Hall of Fame first, then the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame, the first Argentine player to ever receive the honor, his 20-how jersey even sent into space as a tribute to his impact on Latin American basketball. The Argentine government gave him a medal for his work with the sport, and he and Marianella started a foundation to help poor kids in Argentina get access to sports and education, building courts and schools, giving them the same chance the game had given him. He never pushed his boys to play basketball, never made them pick up a ball unless they wanted to, instead starting a dad camp every summer, teaching them to play soccer and tennis and swim, to love movement and competition. In any form. At home, he spoke only Spanish, cooking empanadas and asado with the boys, teaching them to dance the tango in the living room, passing on the Argentine culture he'd carried with him all over the world. His chronic injuries faded with time, the soreness in his ankles and knees gone with no more hard practices and games, and he played pickup basketball with friends on weekends, slow and easy, just for fun. He spent most mornings at the Spurs training facility now, sitting in the stands with a basketball playbook in his hand, watching the young players run drills, their feet pounding the wooden floor the same way his had for so many years. A cup of coffee appeared beside him, black, just how he liked it. And he looked over to see Popovich sitting down next to him, the two of them quiet, just watching the court. Manu's eyes drifted to the number 20 painted on the floor at center court, the retired jersey logo bright against the wood, and he smiled, his finger tracing a pass route on the playbook in his hand, the same route he'd run 100 times, the same route he'd just shown a young guard how to make minutes before. The game was different now, the players younger, the pace faster, but the heart of it was the same. Pass the ball, trust your teammate, play hard, play together. It was never just about the points, never just about the wins. It was about the family, the team, the game that had given him everything.